You grab your Bibles and you can open it to Luke chapter 19 and grab your lesson sheets and go to page 4, numerical 4 on the bottom. It's technically your second stapled sheet that you have. But go to the page that is marked numerically as the page 4 and go to section C towards the top of the page. That's where we'll find our study tonight. Does anybody need a copy of tonight's lesson that we're working on? Just raise your hand and I'll be glad to send any copies back that you might need. No hands. Okay. So it'll be the number 4 on the bottom of it. It should be the number 4 on the bottom of the page. It's technically the second sheet. What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's on the back of the first sheet. They're double-sided. You not have page 4? It should be on the back of the front. You know. You want a whole set or just tonight? That's tonight. Okay, figure one more. While I'm doing this at home, if you're watching us, you can go to the Bible Classes link and you can download this as well so you can follow along at home. Send that down. Thank you. Okay, I think that covers everybody. We're talking about the return of Jesus. We're talking about the fact that the return of Jesus is a what? Fact, all right? We're talking about the fact that the return of Jesus is a fact, and it's important for us to recognize that without the return of Jesus, where does the gospel land? Nowhere, right? It doesn't bring us anywhere without the return of Jesus. What is associated with the return of Jesus? We haven't talked in a lot of detail yet about it, but what's associated with the return of Jesus that we first think of? Okay? Sometimes we think of the judgment. What else? In relationship to our salvation. The separation, but you can't be separated until you're what first? Wow, I thought that was a lot easier than it. You got to be resurrected before any of that can happen, okay? And so the resurrection is tied to the second coming of Jesus. That's why it's an important factor. That's why without it, you don't have the same salvation message. That's why the gospel message falls apart without the return of Jesus. Too many things are tied to that moment and that event for it to just disappear and go away would destroy many facets of what God intends in relationship to His purposes in fulfilling the salvation of man. And so that's why it's an important subject. Over the next 6 weeks, or tonight and then 6 more after tonight, studies, we're going to talk about this important aspect of the gospel message. Let's go over to Luke chapter 19. We've been talking about these parables, and one of the things that Jesus did on many occasions in referencing or helping folks recognize the manner in which He would turn and to help them understand certain facets about His return, He used parables in order to illustrate it to them. And generally they were about somebody not being what? Not being prepared and ready, okay? Most of these deal with somebody in some form or fashion not being ready for the return of the master of the house, which generally is Jesus in the picture. So in Luke chapter 19, let's pick up our reading in verse 11 and let's look at this particular parable. As they heard these things, He added and spoke a parable because He was nigh to Jerusalem and because they supposed that the kingdom of God was immediately to appear. If you think you and I have difficulties with the concept of the coming of Jesus some 2,000 years later, here they are already in those early days, Jesus fearing that they would have this idea that His return would be immediate. As soon as He introduces the thought that He's going to leave and come back, they're immediately jumping to conclusions that this will probably be a short span of time and He'll immediately return. So He begins this parable. He said, therefore, certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and return. He called 10 servants of his and gave them 10 pounds and said unto them, trade ye herewith till I come. But his citizens hated him and sent an embassage after him, saying, We will not that this man reign over us. And it came to pass, when he was come back again, having received the kingdom, that he commanded his servants, unto whom he had given the money, to be called to him, that he might know what they had gained by trading. And the first came before him, saying, Lord, thy pound hath made 10 pounds more. And he said unto him, Well done, thou good servant, because thou wast found faithful in a very little, have thou authority over 10 cities. And the second came, saying, Thy pound, Lord, have made 5. And he said unto him also, Be thou also over 5 cities. And another came, saying, Lord, behold, here is thy pound, which I kept laid up in a napkin. For I feared thee, because thou art in a big word, I don't even, austery, is that right? Austere, I never heard that word before. And because I've been reading from King James in my own study, I'm going to switch to the King James to make it easier. Doesn't that sound weird? I'm trying to see. I've lost. It's the same word. Now I got to figure out which translation I was reading from, because that word did not come across. Anyway, so he says, that fellow, thou takest up that thou layest not down, and reapest that thou didst not sow. And he saith unto him, Out of thine own mouth will I judge thee, thou wicked servant. Thou knewest that I was an austere man, taking up that I laid not down, and reaping that I did not sow. And wherefore then gavest not thou my money into the bank, that at my coming I might have required mine own with usury? And he said unto them that stood by, Take from him the pound, and give it to him that hath 10 pounds. And they said unto him, Lord, he hath 10 pounds. Let me rephrase that, how they would say it. Lord, he already has 10 pounds. That's what they're saying. Why would I take the 1 pound from this guy and give it to the guy who's already got 10? That's the question. For I say unto you, that unto every one which hath shall be given, and from him that hath not, even that he hath shall be taken away from him. But those mine enemies which would not that I should reign over them, bring hither and slay them before me. How many groups of individuals we've got in this parable, by the way? Okay, you've got one group of people who have no desire to honor whom? The king, okay? So here's this guy, he's got a kingdom, and he says there's a lot of people that hate me, a lot of people that don't want me to reign, a lot of people that don't respect my authority. Then he has whom? So he's got some servants. He's got some who accept his kingship and have been given certain responsibilities within the kingdom. Each of them, within their abilities, were given responsibility. And so the king gives out these. And I want you to recognize something I believe is important in relationship to the parable. He says to them, you go and be productive amongst a world or a kingdom that doesn't what? Doesn't like the king, so he doesn't like, or it doesn't like you. The success of each of these servants must come despite the fact that the environment they're in isn't necessarily cooperative to them. And why I believe that's important for us to recognize is that God demands of me, as a child of God, as a follower of Jesus, as someone who belongs to the kingdom of Christ, to be productive in a world that doesn't want me to be productive, in a world that will not aid me to be productive. When the master returns, when the king returns, he's not going to accept excuses. The world was awful. There were too many wicked people. They hated you and they hated me. There was all these problems and challenges that I had to overcome. Therefore, here's the one talent you gave me back. He says, I want you to be productive even in a world that doesn't want to aid you in that productivity. God is going to require of us, when Jesus returns, when the King returns, He's going to ask us not what excuse do we have for our failures. He's going to ask us what we accomplished with what He gave us and the abilities that we have. Too often we forget that even though the world may be dark and bleak and have its challenges and sinful practices and things that make it very difficult for us to be the kind of disciples and followers of Jesus that we would desire to be, I am still accountable. And so He rewards the man who got the 10, right? He rewards him with 10 cities. He rewards the man with 5 cities, and the one who put the pound in the napkin and offered it just in return to him, he received what? Now, in fact, it was taken from him. Visualize that with me for a second. You're part of the kingdom. You're part of the kingdom of God. You're a follower of Jesus Christ. And He returns, and all you have in terms of fruit from your or my life is to return back to Jesus what He gave me to begin with. And He says, I'm going to take it from you. I won't accept and reward you for simply returning unto me the same way I presented you to begin with. You need to be better. There needs to be evidence of fruit. You need to be stronger. There needs to be greater faith. There needs to be evidence of growth and maturity over a period of time. Jesus is very, very explicit here in His description of how vitally important it is to bear fruit and have that fruit ready for what? For what moment? Yeah, and whenever, right? Whenever that returning, there needs to be a production, a produce that is happening so that when the King returns, He'll find it. He'll find it. He'll see it. He even tells the man, you could have at least what? Yeah, you can at least done that. At the bare minimum. The bare minimum. You could have at least used it in terms of bringing some. But here's what's interesting too. What did Jesus say, or what did the man say the problem was? That big word I couldn't pronounce. What did He say about the man? Okay, he's afraid of him. Let me ask you this. Which is more fearsome? To fall into the hands of the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, to fall in the hands of God without ever producing 1 ounce of benefit in His kingdom, or falling into the hands of a God having served and worked? Which one is scary? You know, the man says, I was afraid, so I'm afraid to lose it, and so I did nothing. I don't know why he wasn't afraid to return to the Lord nothing. We ought to be afraid to return to the Lord nothing. That's where fear should be. Fear should not be in serving the Lord. Fear should not be in actively pursuing what the Lord desires from us. Fear should not be of us being afraid that we're going to fail, and so we'll do nothing. What I really ought to be afraid of is the Master returning, and I have nothing to show for what He's blessed and offered and given unto me. That is a fearful thing. And that's the picture. The return is coming. It's not always going to be easy. The world at large may not help and assist or aid us in any way in producing the fruit that God desires, but He still wants the fruit. The Master still wants to see people who have been productive, and when He does, He'll reward them. He'll reward them. If He doesn't, He says those who really will gain the benefit. I'll gather. Whose was it to begin with, by the way? The man who was afraid to lose that one penny. Okay, it belonged to the Master to begin with, right? Okay, it already belonged to Him. And so basically what Jesus says is, I'm going to gather up everything that belongs to me to begin with, and I'm going to disperse what belongs to me to those who were productive in my kingdom. So when Jesus returns, I don't want to be found sitting around doing nothing in the kingdom. When Jesus returns, I want to have an active, productive life in service to Him, or here's the danger that I'm going to fall in. Any thoughts or questions about the parable itself? Note your questions. Why does Jesus tell this parable? He introduced it at the beginning of the context. Because they thought the kingdom was coming quickly, right? And so the implication of that is you don't know. You don't know how quick the king's going to return. So just be productive. And if it's a short span of time, be productive in that short span of time. If it's a long period of time, then be productive over that span of time. Don't just assume, be productive. What are the servants to anticipate as they do business in the master's absence? Okay, that's one expectation they have and anticipate. What else? Okay, and remember, and this part, and I talked about it at the beginning of my discussion of this, and let me go back to that text. Go here to verse 14. But his citizens hated him and sent a message after him, saying, "We will not have this man to reign over us." And it came to pass that when he was returned, having received the kingdom, then he commanded his servants to be called unto him. There's a hatred, a general hatred of the king, and failure to produce, even though there might be widespread dissent among the servants, is still, and he still anticipates his servants being productive, even if others have disregarded him. And that's what we talked about earlier. What's the main principle Jesus is trying to get across in this story? Yeah, be ready and be productive while you're preparing. Okay, run to Matthew 25. Let's look at another description that Jesus uses in relationship to his return. Matthew chapter 25, verse 31. Same basic kind of description that we've seen thus far in working through these texts. What features did you see that are similar? You go to your question sheets. What features are similar between the parable of the tares and the teachings found in Matthew 25? I think I heard the word. Okay. Okay. What else? The parable of the tares and wheat really kind of was a parable more about what? About separation, right? And there's a similar feel to this one as well. That at His coming, and I rarely spell the word separation right, but I'm going to try. I think that's right. I'm looking at my own notes. I probably spelled it wrong in my notes. I think that's right. You couldn't read what I wrote anyway. But here's what I want you to... Here's the fearful part. And here's the part... I've been listening to some studies that Kevin and Sarah actually went and heard over the past weekend. But one of the elements of Scripture that a lot of folks want to deny or act as though it's not real is the idea that God's going to separate those who are saved and those who are not. And to try to argue that in the universalist position that all men everywhere will be saved, you must argue against every single one of these parables that Jesus has written about the wheat and the tare, and this one here in Matthew 25, because all of them talk about what? A moment where there's a separation. Let the wheat and the tares grow together. I'll harvest them all when I send my angels down. I'll harvest it all together and I'll separate it. And I'll destroy the tares, and the good produce I will keep and use. And you see the same kind of symbolism here in this text. What does Jesus emphasize as the difference between the sheep and the goats? Okay, some served and some did not. Okay, that was kind of the idea. Those who found ways to be of service and those who didn't was the general difference between the two in that text in Matthew 25. You know, because he describes what? Those who needed what? Clothing, you gave them clothes. Those who need a drink. And when you were doing that, you were doing it as if you're doing that to Jesus, right? As you were serving others, it is as though you, and because they said, when did we give you water or gave you clothes? We don't remember that. He said, when you did it for somebody else, you did it for me. Then the goats They're going to say, well, when did we see you? We never saw you thirsty. We never saw you in need of clothing. We would have certainly jumped in and helped if we had seen it. And what did Jesus say? When you saw it, when you saw the need in other people and did nothing, then you didn't serve me. And so He says a great separation is coming. It's amazing, really, when the more I read these parables and the more I think about the centralized thought of Jesus continually teaching, I'm coming back, I'm coming back, I'm coming back. You don't know when, you don't know the timing. Those in Jesus' day may have thought it'd be a short span of time. There were those who, obviously, when Peter wrote, when he said, that some men count slackness, the Lord is not slack. Some men count slackness, but is long-suffering to usward, not willing that any should perish, but all come to repentance in 2 Peter 3 and verse 9. What's the point of that? The point is that some folks convince themselves that because Jesus is yet to return, I don't have any obligation to Him. I'm not responsible to Him. But Jesus says, you don't know the timing. You don't know when I'm coming back. So be productive. Because there will be a day I will return and I'm going to separate folks. And I'm going to send those who were productive in one direction, and I'm going to send those who are not in another. Personal responsibility and accountability to the King in prepping for His return. And again, that's a conclusion they would have to draw separate and apart from what Jesus' own words are talking about. But it's true. And we have difficulties, and when I say we, just generically speaking, men have difficulties with the concept of a condemnation that God could provide. But it is clear in these descriptions that Jesus is talking about a separation that will, and when will it occur? Last question in that section. At His return, right? And then the judgment will come. And the importance of recognizing that moment. Yes, go ahead, Bob. Right. Well, it's all within and it's kind of because each parable has its own flavor, its own set of emphasis. But when you add them all together and you look at all of them collectively, it is there's obviously responsibility based on ability because every person doesn't have the same abilities. It's responsibility based on opportunity. It's a response. But what we're supposed to be doing is pretty obvious, in the sense that the commission has been given to share the message of Jesus. That doesn't mean I have to be the personal one sitting across the table, but I should be productive in finding a way to be involved in the cause of Christ and sharing His message. After all, Jesus' summed up mission was to come to seek and what? Seeking to save that which was lost. I mean, that's the summed up mission of Jesus. And to be a follower of Him would mean I'd follow in His great commission of trying to seek and save. So again, I think I understand your question, but it's going to depend on the person, ability, talent, opportunity. All those things will come into play. But there better be some obvious way. Right. Well, and I agree. I don't believe the fruit is necessarily what's the word I'm looking for, but we need to be careful that it's not that we don't think in terms of soul winning that it's not a results oriented, a numbers oriented conversation. The fruit of my life in terms of souls, seeking souls to save is the planting of the seed, or maybe I'm the waterer. God then adds the increase where He deems, where the good and honest hearts are, where that seed is received. So the fruit that I'm producing isn't necessarily the soul itself that comes to Jesus. The fruit I'm producing is the work of spreading the seed and watering what somebody else has already brought forth and being a servant in the vineyard of Jesus. I think we do need to be careful that we don't consume our ideas with the idea that if I don't, and you've heard, and then maybe it comes back to some of those old phrases that you used to hear where somebody say, nobody goes to heaven alone. You better take somebody with you or you're probably not going yourself. And so we hear phrases like that. And though I understand where those come from and what people are trying to mean by that, we also need to understand that there's a sense that we can't think completely that direction. I suppose it's absolutely possible that somebody could plant the seed of the gospel their entire lives, and if the hearts aren't good and honest where they happen to be, there may not be an increase in that, but they will be rewarded for the work and service to the kingdom.
It's not just how many people you say, although that's supposed to be something that we want to do.
Right.
But that's not the full, complete business of our work.
Right.
There's other things
that we come. And we don't know either in some ways what the indirect effects of my work might be on behalf of other people. And I may never, let me just give you an illustration. Fields might be ripe somewhere else, better harvest somewhere else. Work in Brazil might be going well. And for every soul that Dennis Allen in Brazil is able to reach with the gospel and the Lord adds increase because we helped him, that fruit goes up to us as well. If you understand what I'm saying. We find a way. You find a way to be involved in the work of the gospel. And it may not be me personally. It may be financial assistance. It may be encouragement. It may be praying about it. But Jesus needs to find us doing something when He returns in service to Him. And that's the overall message, I think, of these parables. Go ahead, Gary. Did you have another thought? And the point being is Jesus is coming. Since we don't know when, be ready. And when He comes, what will He find? What will He find in me? Not, and that's where we kind of have to, not think so much group. At that point, we got what will He find in me, in my life, when He returns, and the things I'm trying to accomplish. Yeah. Which is easy to do sometimes. All right, let's run to John 14. John chapter 14, Jesus' disciples are pretty upset. And why is that? Okay. It's starting to sink in that He's going to be leaving. And He senses that. And so, in verse 1 of John chapter 14, He tells them what? Okay, let not your heart be troubled. what would ease their troubled mind? What does Jesus say? Yeah. What does He say right there? Believe. You believe in me, or you believe in God, believe also in me. What carries your troubled heart is your faith. What carries a troubled heart is your faith. Jesus' answer to those who were troubled, challenged, concerned, worried, insecure, not sure what tomorrow was going to bring, what's the next step going to be, all that, the answer to all of that anxiety. You believe in God, don't you? Sure we do. You believe in me. Trust me. Trust me. Trust me in what? Verse 2. That my Father's house are many mansions or dwelling places, abodes. And if it were not so, I would have told you. For I go to prepare a place for you. There's all kinds of symbolic and specific kinds of connections to that phrase. But two basic thoughts to think about is, number one, Jesus says, I'm going, and for the purpose of what? Preparing so that you can come, right? So that you can go. If I go and prepare a place for you, I come again and will receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. I'm leaving, but you need me to leave. You need me to leave. Because I'm leaving to make ready so that then I can come back and take you to be with me. Jesus' description is, I'm leaving so that you'll have your place. What's the text we talked about? My mind's going blank on me right now, but Sunday morning we talked about the idea that Jesus recognized with His disciples that they had to come to terms with. They had responsibilities. And Jesus says, I'm turning this over to you. My work's finished. I'm finishing the course here. I'm about, and I'm going to turn this work over to you. Now it's your turn. Now you've got a role. You've got a place. You've got it. So Jesus says, I go so that you can fulfill your purposes. I'll make ready, and you can come. I'll come back, and then we can go what? Then we can go home and be together. Then we can go all back to the Father's house. And so these are all the fulfillment of purposes. But in our context of study, the great promise we need to focus on is that Jesus says, I'm what? I'm coming back. Come back. I'm promising you. In just as much truth is in the fact, and I think that's what the phrase when He says, in my Father's house are many mansions, if it were not so, I would have told you. I think what Jesus is basically saying is, I have confidently affirmed to you nothing but truth. If this isn't a fact, I would have told you the truth. I have always told you the truth. And I believe that's important because the next phrase is, I'm leaving and I'm coming back. Okay? You can trust this. You believe me or not? You believe in God? Believe also in me. God's house has lots of dwelling places. Lots of folks are welcome to come. I'm going to prepare a place for you. These things are true. If they weren't true, I would have told you what the truth is. Trust what I'm saying. I'm coming back. Their troubled hearts could be rest assured in the fact that He's going to return. A return, by the way, in its literal form that they did not what? That they did not see. We're well beyond the days of the apostles. Yeah. All right. Yeah, those issues. But we're well past that day. But from the day, from the basic time frame that Jesus ascends back to the Father, from that day forward, His disciples are waiting for one moment in time. The return of Jesus. When we partake of the Lord's Supper, Jesus in the teaching said, you show the Lord's death till I come. Till I come. Number one, it shows us how long that's to continue. It also tells us it has an end. You don't need a memorial when you live in fulfillment, right? You no longer need a memorial. When you're residing with God the Father and God the Son in heaven, and He's right there in front of you for eternity, you don't need a memorial anymore. You're living with the reality. And so He says, until I come. Again, the implication of His return, the promise of it. I go to prepare a place. You can finish the rest of those statements there. He says, I go to prepare. I gave you that one. He says, and I will come again and what? And receive. And receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be. And all of this is based on, and here's the key word to me. Jesus says, I promise you, this is true. I haven't lied to you yet. I didn't lie to you about the many dwelling places in my Father's house. I'm telling you the truth. Rest easy in your hearts, because I'm leaving for a period of time that other texts teach us that only God the Father knows. But don't worry yourselves over it, because I'm coming back, and that moment will be grand. Because I'll receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you can be. It seems to me that all this time, for God's reasons alone, and that's sufficient for me, is necessary for the preparation and then the ultimate acceptance of those who have been followers of Jesus. Preparing ourselves for the day that Jesus will return. And that promise is extended, as John 12:26 illustrates, not just to His immediate apostles, but whom? Everyone. Everyone can look forward to the very same thing. The only person who should fear the second coming of Jesus are those who have not prepared, those who have not been diligent, those who have not been productive, those who've turned in hatred towards the King of Kings. The rest of us can respect, be in awe of, but we don't have to fear in the same senses that others fear the return of Jesus. Any thoughts about those parables, descriptions that Jesus used? All right, in our last few minutes, let's talk about what Jesus taught here, or what Luke records for us, and the events surrounding Jesus and His departure. In Acts chapter 1, Jesus has now died, been buried, and there's resurrection. And as Jim has pointed out earlier, there's still a feeling that we're going to have the great Jewish kingdom again now, and no, it's time for Jesus to ascend. We see that description when He said these things in verse 9. As they were looking, He was taken up, and a cloud received Him out of their sight. And while they were looking steadfastly into the heaven as He went, behold, two men stood by them in white apparel, who also said, Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye looking into heaven? This Jesus, who was received up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as ye beheld Him going into heaven. It was time for them to quit being awestruck, disappointed, heartbroken, all the things they were going through. It was time to put all that aside, because they had work to do. Don't just gaze and sit around. To me, it seems obvious as you read the New Testament, you find there were several Christians who had convinced themselves that they were just going to sit back and wait for Jesus to come on back. And Jesus didn't want anybody sitting around just doing nothing, but to be preparing for that moment of Jesus' return. But we get a slight glimpse into the manner of that return. Because what were these men told as they're gazing and watching this scene? In like manner, okay, as in the like manner of what you've just witnessed, Jesus ascended, was received into a cloud, and back into the right hand of the Father. And in like manner, He will return. So, question 1 asks you to finish the phrase, this same Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven. What's the finish of that phrase? We've already said it 3 times. Okay. Shall return in like manner. Okay. And then the second question he asked, then in like manner indicates similar features between the ascension of Jesus and His return. In what ways do you think His return will be similar? Okay. The key to me, the imagery-wise, the one thing that jumps out at you is, okay, in the cloud. Now, what don't we know about that cloud? Well, and in terms of the cloud itself, what don't we know? What it looks like, okay? Sometimes language is intended to give us the best description it can. And so I remember years ago, most people assume Jesus will return in what kind of cloud? In a thundercloud. Why do they believe that? And you want to know why? And I'm not putting you on the spot, Pat. They believe that because that's when they get scared. Think about it. Thunderstorm comes. What happens? People get nervous, get anxious. Jesus is going to return. They've convinced themselves that it's got to be because they've determined that Jesus' return has to be fearful and scary. But it doesn't have to be fearful and scary to the faithful. And this isn't a scary moment. This is a beautiful moment. Son of God gets to go home. This is a beautiful scene here in Acts chapter 1. The Son of God has lived a guileless life. Went to Calvary and put His body upon a cross and was crucified. He was raised from that tomb and He walked and talked and so that there'd be plenty of witnesses to the fact that He genuinely was raised from the dead. And the Son now gets to go home. It's a beautiful moment. And in like manner, He shall return. I don't know what kind of cloud that will be, but I wouldn't just assume that just because it's a nice sunny summer day with them big puffy beautiful white clouds out there, that He couldn't be behind one of those. Don't assume that we've got this. And the cloud may be more of just a veil of some kind. That he as He ascends, He's encompassed where they see Him no more. So in like manner. In like manner implies what, by the way? In similar fashion. In like manner. Doesn't necessarily imply in specific manner. In like manner. This is in the same. Did they expect Him to go back to the Father? Even though He told him He was going to? No. In like manner. Unexpected. He's coming back. There's lots of similarities that sometimes we miss because we're caught up in the cloud. Right? We're kind of caught up in the imagery. And we forget. In like manner. In an unexpected way. In like manner with majesty and awe. This is the Son of God. In like manner, the list of those kinds of things, though they're not vividly necessarily described in the text, they're there in the imagery of that text. And there'll be some differences as well. Okay. I think the emphasis that we've placed on the promise of Jesus' return has been adequately illustrated in the text that we've looked at. So I'm going to move on. I didn't get quite all that accomplished there in this lesson, but I think that the point was to validate and prove the return of Jesus. And so to keep true to my hopes of getting all 4 lessons done and now the last 3 and the remaining 6 sessions we'll have, then let's move on to lesson 2. So we will move on to lesson 2, Lord willing, on Sunday. And that hopefully will be the pattern. Two classes per lesson, and that'll finish up the quarter. Because we have the break with the gospel meeting in the midst of that.